Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we strip away the noise, take a stack of dense sources, and pull out the absolute clearest, most surprising insights you need to be truly well-informed.
And today, we are tackling a giant, a huge project, cracking open the life and legacy of Thomas Alva Edison.
Right, and that name, it just instantly brings up the image of the Wizard of Menlo Park and, the light bulb.
But that's a bit like judging a whole planet by its atmosphere. It's the first thing you see, but it's not the whole story.
Not at all.
We're looking at a figure who, you could argue, literally invented the modern concept of organized industrial science. He created the first industrial research laboratory.
He wrote the playbook.
He absolutely wrote the playbook for innovation, for managing teams, and for this kind of relentless systematic testing that got him, an astonishing 1,093 U.S. patents.
That number is just staggering. So when we say deep dive on this one, we really mean it. We are going way beyond the light bulb.
Oh.
We're exploring his entire industrial reach, from telegraphy and power distribution to things you just wouldn't expect. Mining, cement.
And the foundational elements of the music and film industries.
Exactly. Our mission today is to look at his, let's say, controversial business practices, the truly unexpected side ventures, and maybe most fascinating of all, the deep fundamental paradoxes that really defined him.
Because that's the core of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
The central contradiction is just stunning. Here's a man who is self-educated, almost completely deaf.
And yet
he revolutionized sound, light, and the power distribution systems that they literally shape the world we live in today. That tension between his own limitations and his world-changing inventions, that's the thread we're going to be pulling on.
Okay, let's unpack this. Time to start at the very beginning. Thomas Alva Edison was born in 1847 in Milan, Ohio, but he really came into his own in Port Huron, Michigan. Now, we always hear the simple story that he was self-educated.
Right.
But what did the sources actually tell us about how he built his knowledge? What was the foundation?
Well, the key is that his education was systematic, even if it wasn't formal. He only went to school for a few months.
A few months.
That's it. His mother, Nancy Matthews Elliott, she was a former school teacher, and she took over. She taught him the basics: reading, writing, arithmetic.
So it was a homeschool environment.
Exactly. And that self-guided approach was fundamental because it let him just dive into whatever interested him most without the rigid structure of a 19th century classroom.
And what grabbed his attention was science and philosophy.
Absolutely. The foundational text, the book that really lit the fire, was called A School Compendium of Natural and Experimental Philosophy.
What was in it?
It was packed with instructions for basic experiments, stuff you could do with materials that were easy to find. And for Edison, this was it. It immediately led him to start tinkering with electricity, with chemistry. He wasn't just reading theories.
He was reading a manual.
It was a how-to guide for immediate application. He wasn't learning passively. He was using the book to do things.
But it wasn't just the technical stuff. The sources also point to the philosophical framework he got from his parents. They were big readers of Thomas Paine.
And that's a key piece of context that so often gets missed. The influence of Paine meant he was grounded in this tradition of rationalism, of skepticism, what people at the time called scientific deism.
So a very questioning, logical approach to the world.
It instilled in him this fiercely independent way of thinking that you see throughout his entire career. He didn't just invent things. He approached every single problem with this analytical, almost skeptical worldview.
And that intellectual curiosity, it turned into entrepreneurial energy almost immediately. Let's talk about his first real side hustle, the train job.
He started so young. Around age 12, he was a news butcher on the trains running between Port Huron and Detroit, selling newspapers, candy, vegetables to the passengers.
And this wasn't just a kid's job, it was his first business.
A self-run business, and he was wildly successful at it. The sources show that by age 13, he was turning a profit of $50 a week.
$50 a week in the 1860s. That's an enormous amount of money for a child.
It's a fortune. And where did all that capital go? Right back into the engine of his curiosity. He funneled every penny into buying more equipment for his electrical and chemical experiments.
He even had a lab on the train, right?
He did. He managed to set up a small laboratory in the baggage car.
And as if that wasn't enough, he also founded his own newspaper, the Grand Trunk Herald.
Yes, and this is where you see his early grasp of production and distribution. He wasn't just selling papers, he was publishing his own. He put out 24 issues.
How many subscribers did he have?
He managed to get 500 subscribers and even hired 2 assistants to help him. So think about that. By age 15, he is already managing people, controlling content, and mastering market demand. The whole systematic view of production was there long before Menlo Park ever existed.
That entrepreneurial engine was firing on all cylinders, but his health was starting to falter. Let's get into his deafness, which started developing around age 12.
Yeah, the historical consensus, the most likely cause, was a severe bout of scarlet fever and then these recurring, untreated middle ear infections. It was a gradual, persistent physical reality he just had to live with.
But that reality, that was a little too simple for the showman in him. He made up these elaborate, kind of ridiculous stories about it.
Oh, all sorts of tales, like a conductor boxing him on the ears or lifting him by them. He was always keen on controlling the narrative, even about his own body.
Why do you think that was?
It speaks to his need for control, I think, and maybe an unwillingness to just admit a simple vulnerability. But the fascinating part, the really crucial part, is how he internalized it. He reframed this handicap as an asset.
And here's where it gets really interesting. As an adult, he was adamant that his hearing loss was a gift, that it allowed him to avoid distraction and concentrate with this just extreme focus on his work.
Imagine trying to run a chaotic research lab full of machinery and experiments. The wizard essentially had built-in noise-canceling headphones.
It's an incredible thought, and it led to these unique ways of experiencing the world, especially music.
He wouldn't just sit and listen. That wasn't his experience of sound. He would physically clamp his teeth into the wooden frame of a piano or later a phonograph to absorb the sound waves
Vibrations.
directly into his skull. It shows this powerful, almost desperate desire to connect with the very vibrations he was trying to capture and record with his inventions.
It's an astounding paradox. The great orchestrator of modern sound was experiencing it primarily as a physical vibration through his skeleton.
And you have to believe that physical experience informed the sensitivity he built into his audio inventions, especially the phonograph. He knew intimately how mechanical vibration translated into perceived sound.
So his career in telegraphy really kicked off in 1862 after this moment of heroism.
Right.
He saved a child from a runaway train car.
Right, and the grateful father, who was a station agent, trained him as a telegraph operator as a reward. He worked the night shifts from 1863 to 1869, which was perfect for him.
Because it gave him time to study.
Exactly. He was just soaking up knowledge. Spanish, qualitative analysis, and of course the mechanics of electricity. But his incessant tinkering, it sometimes got in the way of his actual job.
Famously so.
There was that famous incident where he was fired from the Grand Trunk Railway after a near train collision, which was the direct result of one of his side experiments. So this era was crucial, though. It taught him the power and the limitations of electrical communication.
By 1869, he's in New York City, and he gets mentored by a man named Franklin Leonard Pope.
Right, and they co-found an electrical engineering company. And already you can see his focus is on system improvements. They're manufacturing machines to record telegraphs, typewriters that printed directly onto the wire. He's always thinking about industrial efficiency.
He was, but his first solo patent, that was a real learning experience.
It was. His very first patent, filed in 1869, was for an electric boat recorder.
And the politicians, they completely ignored it.
Didn't gain any adoption. They told him they preferred the long, complex process of voting because it allowed for last-minute deal-making and political maneuvering.
What a lesson to learn.
A vital one. It taught Edison that novelty for its own sake is worthless. You need utility. You need a market that actually wants what you're selling. He corrected course very quickly after that.
Which brings us to the quadruplex telegraph in 1874. This was pure systems engineering applied to an industry with huge demand.
It was revolutionary. Instead of one message, it could simultaneously transmit 4 messages through a single wire, 2 in each direction.
So it quadrupled the capacity of the entire existing infrastructure overnight.
Precisely. And the business value was immediately obvious to everyone.
And the sale of that single invention, it literally funded his entire future. He sold the quadruplex for $30,000.
Which, when you adjust for inflation, is over $833,000 in today's money. It wasn't just cash.
Yeah.
It was the seed capital for the most important system he would ever create, the invention factory.
Okay, so with nearly $1 million in today's money from that quadruplex sale, Edison builds Menlo Park in Raritan Township, New Jersey in 1876.
And we cannot overstate the importance of this. Menlo Park was not just a bigger basement workshop. The sources are definitive on this. It was the first industrial laboratory.
What does that mean exactly? An industrial laboratory?
It means it was concerned with creating knowledge and then, crucially, controlling its application. This was the shift from the solitary inventor tinkering in a shed to an organized R&D team with a commercial goal.
And the engine driving that team was Edison's infamous work ethic.
Infamous is the right word. He worked extreme hours. We're talking 18 hours a day plus weekends.
Yeah.
And he drove his staff to what was famously described as the limits of human exhaustion.
A brutal pace.
Brutal. But it yielded this unparalleled volume of output, those 1,093 U.S. patents. They reflect this industrial systematic approach. And it's a key point that the credit for these inventions, while legally his as the director, was made possible by the engineers and chemists and machinists working tirelessly under him.
He was the conductor of the orchestra.
A very demanding conductor.
Right.
And this structure meant he had to be incredibly aggressive about protecting his intellectual property. He had patent lawyers on staff and was constantly in court.
Was he just defending his own ingenuity, or was he defending the system he'd built?
He was defending the system. He was defending the output of his employees. The moment the lab produced something marketable, he had to lock down the IP rights to maintain the business model. Litigation was just a necessary cost of doing business when you're churning out patents at that pace.
To really get the mindset behind Menlo Park, you have to look at the physical space. The sources detail this unbelievable inventory he kept. He said he wanted the lab to have, quote, a stock of almost every conceivable material.
It really was an omnivorous scientific hoard. You find the things you'd expect, right? 8,000 kinds of chemicals, every kind of screw ever made.
And then it gets weird.
And then you stumble into the bizarre and the organic. Hair of humans, horses, hogs, cows, camels, silk of every texture. Cocoa, hooves, shark's teeth, deer horns, tortoise shell.
Wait. Shark's teeth and camel hair. Why on earth did he need that kind of stuff just sitting on a shelf?
It was central to his R&D process. You have to remember, this is before the internet, before global supply chains. When they were searching for the perfect material for a light bulb filament or a better diaphragm for a microphone, they couldn't wait weeks to source something.
They needed to test it now.
Immediately. The lab had to be completely self-sufficient. That inventory, it was a physical manifestation of his relentless trial and error methodology.
And he understood that if he branded this methodology, this hard work, he could shape how the public saw him. He was a master of publicity, and he often pushed back against being called a genius.
He was extremely careful about that. He wanted to be seen as the tireless worker. That's where we get that famous line about invention being 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration.
Why that framing?
He was a marketing effort over inherent brilliance, because effort is repeatable, it's scalable, and most importantly, it's relatable to the common investor.
And he didn't just control the public story, he tried to control the scientific story too.
This is fascinating. In 1880, he funded and anonymously served as the chief editor for Science Journal, the same highly respected publication we have today.
So he was secretly running it.
He was using it as a mouthpiece for articles that were favorable to his inventions and his research. When you connect this to the bigger picture, it shows this incredibly sophisticated, modern understanding of narrative control. He wasn't just creating the science, he was controlling the authoritative platform that discussed the science.
Let's look at a specific invention from this period that really illustrates this friction between Edison's claim and the collaborative nature of science. The carbon microphone.
Right. So in 1876, he turns his attention to improving Alexander Graham Bell's telephone.
What was the problem with Bell's phone?
It was weak. It produced a current that was just too faint for any kind of long-distance communication. Edison recognized the weakness was the microphone. It wasn't robust enough.
So what was his solution?
He realized he needed a material whose electrical resistance would vary a lot with just the small pressure changes from sound waves. He designed a carbon microphone, placing carbon granules between two metal plates.
And when you spoke into it?
The sound waves would change the pressure on the granules, which changed their resistance, and that created a much stronger varying current. He reportedly tested 150 materials before he landed on a special coated rubber diaphragm and carbon.
And the result was a huge leap in telephone technology.
An exponential leap. But of course, controversy erupted almost immediately. A respected professor, David Edward Hughes, published a paper in 1878 on the physics of loose-contact carbon microphones, and he claimed credit for discovering the underlying semiconductor effect that made it all work.
So was Edison lying, or was this just two people discovering the same thing at the same time?
The sources suggest it was probably concurrent discovery. But Edison, aggressive as always, publicly challenged Hughes and fiercely defended his patent claim. He saw the invention as a functional, commercial product. Hughes saw the underlying scientific principle.
And Edison got the patent.
He did. But the whole dispute highlights that ongoing tension. Was Edison a true inventor, or was he simply the world's best industrial-scale appropriator of scientific principles discovered by himself, or sometimes by others?
It's clear his curiosity wasn't purely about what could be sold, though. Just 2 years later, in 1878, he invented something called the tessimeter.
A completely non-commercial device. It was this highly sensitive little gadget designed to measure infrared radiation.
And why did he build it?
For a very specific reason. To gauge the heat coming from the solar corona during the total solar eclipse on July 29, 1878.
So he dedicated lab resources to pure science.
Pure, unfettered scientific curiosity. It shows that even inside the pressure cooker of Menlo Park, he was still driven by these deep intellectual questions. Even if they had no immediate path to profit, it kind of humanizes the wizard before he becomes purely a business titan.
While the tessimeter was a curiosity, the phonograph in 1877 was the invention that made him a global sensation almost overnight. This is what earned him the title Wizard of Menlo Park.
Because it really was perceived as magic. It was so novel. Other inventions could record sound waves visually, as a line on paper, but nothing could play them back.
The ability to capture a human voice and then replay it.
It was genuinely shocking to people. The famous scientist Joseph Henry declared him the most ingenious inventor in this country, or in any other.
His first model was pretty crude. It used a sheet of tinfoil wrapped around a grooved cylinder.
Right. The quality was terrible, and a recording would only last for a few plays before the tinfoil was just destroyed. But the principle was proven. He patented it in 1878.
And then, in a pattern we see over and over, he just shelved it.
He did. He was obsessed with electric light at the time, and the phonograph was left dormant for years, which was a huge mistake.
Because it left the door wide open for his competitors.
Exactly. Chichester Bell and Charles Tainter stepped in and produced a much better version using wax-coated cardboard cylinders in the 1880s. And that's what forced Edison to get back in the game.
Hold on. If the invention was so revolutionary, why would he just stop working on it? Wouldn't a true entrepreneur rush to dominate the market?
That's the paradox of Edison. He often focused on the breakthrough, on getting the patent. He'd assume that would establish his dominance, and then he'd move on to the next big problem. He sometimes missed that critical next phase of refinement and commercialization.
Until a competitor forced his hand.
Right, so in 1887, he founds the Edison Phonograph Company to compete with the superior wax cylinders. And this leads to these intense business battles, including the infamous Lippincott scheme.
This is basically corporate espionage.
Pure business espionage. A man named Jesse Lippincott tried to form a complete monopoly. He was offering deals to Edison, to his longtime friend Ezra Gilliland, and to the Bell interests, all while deliberately hiding his real goal.
Which was to control all the patents.
Exactly. Edison was completely blindsided when he figured it out.
And the revelation, it cost him a really important friendship.
It did. His 25-year friendship with Gilliland was immediately over. It led to 5 agonizing years of litigation until Edison finally managed to take total control of the company and the patents. The cost of that victory was enormous, both personally and financially.
We also have to talk about the comical failures from this phase. The talking dolls.
A famous industrial misstep. He tried to mass-produce these talking dolls with tiny phonographs inside, hoping to capture the toy market.
And they were not great.
They were so fragile that the mechanism usually failed during shipment. And sometimes they would arrive with these horrifying, distorted, demonic-sounding voices. Production was shut down in 1890, a very public and very embarrassing failure.
What's really insightful about the phonograph, though, is that Edison completely misjudged its commercial potential at first. He saw it as a business tool.
Right. A tool for dictation, something to redefine the role of secretaries. He saw efficiency.
And the market saw entertainment?
The market wanted music. And by 1899, Edison finally gave in to market demands. He produced a cheap model just for entertainment. It sold for $10 by 1900, and he had a catalog of 3,000 musical records. This pivot shows that even the great systemizer couldn't just dictate what consumers wanted.
And this brings us right back to that central paradox we started with. Edison was mostly deaf. He had no musical training. He couldn't read sheet music, and yet he exerted this tight personal control over the early music industry.
It's incredible. The sources show that all the way through 1915, he personally approved every single artist and every single musical record released by his company.
On what basis?
On the basis of what he thought sounded good, physically to him. He was essentially judging complex auditory art through skeletal vibration and raw tonal quality.
And he didn't even want the artists' names on the records.
No. He saw the records purely as outputs of the Edison system, not as artistic expressions by individuals. It's hard to grasp the profound irony there.
The man controlling the soundscape of the modern world experienced that art in a fundamentally diminished physical way.
It's a powerful illustration of how a unique limitation can drive a creator to hyper-focus on the technical quality and the reproduction of an experience they can't fully have themselves.
That controlling, resistant nature, though, it ultimately proved to be a huge liability when the next revolution arrived. Radio.
Absolutely. The widespread adoption of radio just decimated phonograph sales. The numbers are shocking. Edison's record sales dropped 90% between 1920 and 1921.
A 90% drop.
Meanwhile, radio sales surged 843% from 1922 to 1926.
And despite desperate pleas from his younger managers, even from his own son Charles, Edison just refused to get into the radio business.
He was stubborn. He was focused on micromanaging internal staff issues instead of acknowledging this massive technological shift that was happening right in front of him. It suggests that his greatest strength, total system control, became his greatest weakness when he was faced with true disruption.
If the phonograph made him famous, the system of electric light made him a foundational figure in history. By 1878, his goal was not just to invent a light bulb.
No, that's the crucial distinction. He wanted to invent an entire system of illumination that could compete directly with the existing gas and oil lighting infrastructure.
He understood that a successful invention needed the whole support system to be commercially viable as a utility. Generation, transmission, metering, safety.
The light bulb was just one component of a much bigger puzzle.
But it was a critical component. Other bulbs existed, but they died quickly and used way too much power. His immediate goal was a durable, low-resistance incandescent lamp. What was the process for finding that perfect filament?
It was a brutal, methodical slog of trial and error, just pure perspiration. He started with carbonized cardboard, which burned out almost instantly. Then he moved through thousands of organic materials.
Like what?
Linen thread, hemp, palmetto fiber. He was systematically sending people out to the world to find materials with the right kind of cellular structure to hold up under the heat.
And what was the breakthrough material?
Carbonized bamboo. The sources note that a single thin strand of carbonized bamboo fiber could last for over 1,200 hours.
And the key property of that bamboo was its high resistance.
Exactly. And that high resistance was the critical factor that dictated the choice of his power source, 110 volts direct current, or DC.
Why that specific voltage?
Because the high voltage meant you needed less current to get the same amount of power, which in turn meant you could use thinner and much, much cheaper copper wiring.
So the choice of filament dictated the entire standard for the U.S. power grid that we still use today. That's an amazing chain reaction.
It speaks volumes about his system thinking. And to manage this huge effort, he built a stellar team. He hired Francis Robbins Upton, a brilliant mathematician who had studied under the great Hermann von Helmholtz.
Upton was the general manager.
Right. And he was compensated handsomely for it, with 5% of the profits.
That kind of compensation structure must have motivated some exceptional loyalty and effort.
Absolutely. This systematic, organized, compensated R&D model was in full effect. And you had his experimental assistants, the brothers John and Fred Ott, who were indispensable. They did the grueling, repetitive experiment, perfecting the vacuum inside the bulb and the intricate glasswork required to make them durable.
The viability of the whole system was proven commercially in 1880.
Yes, on the steamship Columbia, which was owned by Henry Villard. It was the first commercial vessel to have Edison's lighting system installed.
And Villard was so impressed he became a major investor.
He did. He became one of Edison's key financiers moving forward. And building on that success, Edison founded the Edison Electric Light Company in 1880, attracting huge names like J.P. Morgan and the Vanderbilts.
Now, to commercialize this, they had to solve the massive problem of getting power from the generator to the customer without going bankrupt on the cost of copper wire.
Because DC requires really thick copper wires for safe, low-voltage transmission. His solution was the three-prong wire system, which dramatically reduced the amount of copper needed and made the whole infrastructure financially feasible.
And then there's the logistical challenge of metering. How did he bill people without the modern meters we have today?
He invented this brilliant chemical-based metering solution. It was a little cell that contained a zinc solution and 2 zinc plates. This device was installed in every customer's home.
How did it work?
A fixed percentage of the current the customer used would flow through this cell, and that current would cause zinc to precipitate or deposit onto one of the plates.
So he wasn't measuring the electricity directly, he was measuring the chemical output of the electricity?
Precisely. The plates were collected and weighed every month. The difference in weight told them exactly how much power the customer had used, and that's how they calculated the bill. It was a literal cash register in a jar. It just shows how Edison was always leveraging chemistry to solve electrical engineering problems.
And the whole system officially launched on September 4th, 1882, with the 600 kilowatt Pearl Street station in New York City, providing 110 volts of DC power. And the success was so subtle, it was revolutionary.
The Boston Globe had this great line about it. They noted that very few people even noticed the switch from gas because the electric lights were so steady and so similar. They wrote, "Edison has had an opening night. His aim is to open night until it shall be as day."
It was so seamless, people barely realized this fundamental technological shift had just occurred right under their noses.
A quiet revolution.
But the empire had a built-in weakness, a real Achilles heel that the DC system just could not overcome.
Distance.
Distance.
That's right. Because of the inherent voltage drop, DC power plants could not reliably deliver electricity more than about 1 mile, 1.6 kilometers from the source.
Which meant the DC system was fantastic for dense urban areas like Manhattan.
Completely unsuitable for small cities, towns, or any rural areas.
And this limitation provided the perfect entry point for George Westinghouse and alternating current, or AC, and this ushers in the infamous War of the Currents.
AC had the transformative element of the transformer. It could step voltages up and down easily. This meant AC could be transmitted for long distances at very high voltage over cheaper, thinner wires, and then be stepped down safely for people to use in their homes.
So AC immediately started gaining massive market share by servicing all the territories that DC just couldn't touch.
And Edison's reaction to this competition was not innovative. It was dogmatic, it was intensely personal, and frankly, it was ugly.
An all-out propaganda war.
Completely.
Yeah.
He struck out personally against George Westinghouse, publicly stating, and this is a quote, "Just as certain as death, Westinghouse will kill a customer within 6 months after he puts in a system of any size." He was leveraging public fear against the dangers of high-voltage transmission.
Was this really about safety, or was it about protecting his huge investment in DC infrastructure?
Oh, it was overwhelmingly about business and sunk costs. Edison Electric had installed over 100 DC systems. The idea of switching the standard, of invalidating millions of dollars in infrastructure, was financially impossible for him.
And by 1887, he was losing ground fast.
Rapidly. You had 121 DC stations versus Westinghouse's 68 AC, and another rival, Thomson Houston, with 22. He was fighting for his corporate life.
And this fight led to one of the darker episodes in his history, the Electrocution Campaign. Edison joins forces with a man named Harold P. Brown to publicly discredit AC.
They publicly electrocuted animals, dogs, horses, and most famously Topsy the elephant. They used high-voltage AC to demonstrate its lethality.
It was pure spectacle.
It was theatricality designed to associate AC power with instant terrifying death in the public's mind. And they lobbied aggressively for legislation to severely limit AC voltages, hoping to just make it commercially unviable.
And this campaign culminates with the invention of the electric chair.
Yes, Edison actively colluded with Westinghouse's main rival, Thomson Houston, to make sure the first electric chair was designed to be powered by a Westinghouse AC generator.
The goal was to permanently brand AC as the executioner's current.
A utility of death. And the irony, of course, is that Edison, the committed pacifist, was engineering a machine designed to kill people, all in the name of a business dispute.
Despite all the drama and the terrible PR campaign, the economics were just undeniable. And by 1892, J.P. Morgan, seeing the financial instability, he had to intervene.
Morgan engineered a forced merger of Edison General Electric with their rival, Thomson Houston. The scale of the financial engineering here was immense.
And this was the ultimate corporate defeat for Edison. Morgan decided that Thomson Houston was actually the more valuable company.
He did. He ousted Edison's allies, he put the rival board in charge, and he renamed the entire operation General Electric, GE.
A hostile takeover hidden inside a merger.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Edison was publicly supportive, put on a brave face, but privately he was incredibly bitter that his namesake company and all the patents he had systematically developed were just turned over to the competition he had fought so hard to destroy. He served as a figurehead for a while, and then he just sold his shares.
And this raises a really important question for you, the learner. After the founding inventor establishes the system, how much do they really matter? Edison was the catalyst, but the merger proves that once a technology reaches that massive commercial scale, financial engineering and distribution strategy often become more important than the original creator. So, after basically losing control of the electrical industry he created, Edison didn't retire. He pivoted entirely. He poured his energy into what sounds like a completely unrelated massive endeavor, mining.
Right, from the late 1870s all the way to 1903. And he was driven by another commercial necessity. High-grade iron ore was scarce and very expensive on the East Coast.
So Edison decides he can profitably mine low-grade ore and even beach sand using his specialty.
Magnetics and industrial automation.
He threw a tremendous amount of capital and technology at this idea. He bought several mines and built this huge new automated operation in Ogdensburg, New Jersey. This wasn't a small lab experiment. This was heavy industry.
It was colossal. He purchased the largest steam shovel in America at the time. His whole system relied on these electrically powered 70-ton rollers to crush 5-ton rocks. He was obsessed with automation. He wanted the system to work so that, and this is a quote, no humans would touch the iron until it was fully processed.
That vision of full automation in the late 19th century is just incredible. So how did the magnetic separation part work?
Once the rocks were crushed down into fines like a coarse sand, the material would pass through this array of 480 powerful electromagnets.
And they would just pull the iron out.
They'd select the minuscule iron content from all the waste rock. He even added a pneumatic system, a big blast of air to remove phosphorus, which was unacceptable in the steel-making process. He was leveraging the slight density difference between the iron fines and the phosphorus compounds.
So he applied the systematic scientific R&D model of Menlo Park to a giant pile of dirt. Everything was automated, measured, optimized. Did it work?
Technologically, yes, it worked. Financially, it was a catastrophic failure.
What happened?
A severe economic recession hit in 1893. Iron prices just fell through the floor, and that instantly rendered his high capital investment worthless. Despite all the advanced technology, the mine was just bleeding money, and it put Edison near insolvency.
He failed so spectacularly that he had to take a loan from his father-in-law just to stay afloat.
He did, and it took him until 1903 to finally give up on the whole thing. It must have been devastating, a total industrial-scale defeat.
But here's where Edison's pragmatism is just so impressive. He didn't just walk away from all that infrastructure and the thousands of tons of waste sand.
No, he pivoted immediately to cement production.
So the mining failure became the literal foundation for his next big success.
Precisely. He used the waste sand and all the surviving massive equipment from the failed Ogdensburg venture to produce Portland cement. He established the Edison Portland Cement Company in 1899.
What was his innovation in cement? Surely he wasn't the first person to make it.
No, but he innovated the process. He designed these novel, horizontal, 150-foot-long kilns. Traditional kilns were smaller and required hotter, faster heat.
And his were longer and cooler.
Exactly. Edison's longer kilns allowed the cement to cook for a longer time at a lower temperature, which consumed significantly less coal and required less labor. It was a massive efficiency gain.
It sounds like he leveraged the mining experience to become an industrial engineer specializing in material processing.
That's a great way to put it. And he licensed this proven efficient system to other manufacturers. He was collecting royalties on it well into the 1920s. This turned out to be one of his most profitable and stable long-term ventures.
And he even tried to solve the housing crisis with cement, didn't he?
He did. He wanted to parlay the cement business into cheap, durable housing. He commissioned a system for casting an entire 3-story house from cement in a single mold.
A single pour.
One single pour. It was intended for employee housing. A revolutionary concept, but the complexity and, well, the lack of public demand for these monolithic gray homes meant it never really took off commercially.
Moving into the 20th century, the sources show Edison dedicating his systematic approach to national security during World War I.
At the start of the war, the U.S. chemical industry was pretty primitive. It relied heavily on European imports, especially from Germany, for critical materials like phenol.
Phenol being the key ingredient for explosives and for aspirin. So when the war started, there was an immediate, critical shortage.
Edison responded with astonishing speed. He undertook production at his Silver Lake facility. He built 2 plants with a capacity of 6 tons a day, just 1 month after hostilities began in Europe. He applied the R&D process to chemistry, manufacturing benzene, aniline dyes, xylene, shellac.
The wartime shortages made these ventures incredibly profitable, and it fueled his company through the war years. But there's a fascinating moral wrinkle here about his pacifism.
Right. He preferred not to sell his phenol for military uses, so he ended up selling the surplus to Bayer, who then exported it to Germany,
So he was technically aiding the enemy.
while holding true to his moral commitment not to invent or manufacture weapons. It's a contradiction. But at the same time, he was ensuring U.S. industrial self-sufficiency, which was his main goal.
His dedication to self-sufficiency continued with the rubber project. After the Stevenson Plan in 1921 created these national security concerns about the rubber supply, Edison, Henry Ford, and Harvey Firestone jointly funded a massive research effort.
They contributed $75,000 to systematically find a domestic source of rubber, and the task was just massive. His teams tested an unbelievable 17,000 different plant samples.
17,000. How do you even manage a project like that?
With an aggressive, systematic filtration process based on 6 criteria: latex content, ease of extraction, where the latex was in the plant, growth speed, harvestability, and sustainability.
And what was the conclusion?
They found an adequate source in the goldenrod plant, specifically a species called Solidago leavenworthii I. And through systematic breeding, they managed to increase the plant's latex yield to a commercially viable 12%. It was a fitting late-career triumph for him.
Solving a huge national problem with nothing but relentless, organized research.
Proving the enduring value of the Menlo Park model decades later.
Let's transition to his work in visual technology. Edison had a very clear goal for motion pictures. He wanted, in his words, to do for the eye what the phonograph does for the ear.
He envisioned a kinetophonograph, perfectly synchronized sound and video.
The problem was achieving that synchronization.
It was incredibly difficult. Edison focused on the electromechanical parts, the driving mechanisms, the shutters, but a lot of the credit for the optical and film efforts really goes to his employee, William Kennedy Dixon.
Dixon was the one who pioneered the actual film format and the optical system.
Right. Edison was granted the patent for the kinetograph, which was the camera, and he built the kinetoscope, which is the peephole viewer. That was first publicly exhibited in 1891.
But the sound was still a problem.
Dixon actually produced the first video with sound way back in 1890, but keeping the two synchronized outside the controlled environment of the laboratory was just too complex for commercial development at the time. That difficulty delayed the kinetophone for years. It really required a whole separate technological revolution decades later to master.
Despite the sound trouble, his film empire grew very quickly. In 1908, he formed the Motion Picture Patents Company, which was often called the Edison Trust.
And his studio made nearly 1,200 films, including early classics like The Great Train Robbery. His chief director, Edwin S. Porter, ran the creative side. It's also during this period, in 1903, that his company filmed that horrifying electrocuting an elephant.
The Topsy film.
A deliberate piece of anti-AC propaganda using a circus animal.
And in a final twist of irony, the man who dreamed of synchronized sight and sound technology, he rejected the final product when it arrived.
He did. He thought that talkies had spoiled everything. He believed they focused too much on the voice and that actors had forgotten how to act. He even noted that his deafness made him sense this imbalance more acutely. The man who invented the medium felt the medium had lost its way.
Now let's turn to his second major industrial failure, the battery. In the late 1890s, he set out to develop a lighter, more efficient, rechargeable battery.
Specifically an alkaline nickel-iron battery. He wanted it for his phonographs, and more ambitiously for electric cars, to compete with the lead-acid batteries that were common then.
And this involved an astonishing display of just pure perseverance, or maybe obstinance.
His lab tested 10,000 different combinations of electrodes and solutions to find the perfect mix, 10,000. He finally got a patent in 1901 and founded the Edison Storage Battery Company.
But the invention was plagued with issues right from the start.
The initial batteries failed spectacularly. They would lose their ability to hold a charge after just a few recharge cycles, forcing a total recall on the product. The company's capital was completely wiped out.
But Edison didn't give up.
No. And this shows his profound commitment. He paid for the entire recall and all the ensuing research out of his own private funds. He essentially bought his company back from the brink and just refused to abandon the problem.
How could he afford to fail that big? And why did he keep trying?
He kept trying because he truly believed in electric vehicles and the superiority of alkaline batteries. And he could afford it partly because of his successful cement and lighting royalties, but also because of the massive financial network he'd built, notably with Henry Ford.
Tell us about the Ford link.
Ford met Edison back in 1896 while Ford was working for the Edison Illuminating Company. Ford was just deeply enamored with Edison. So when Edison faced these massive battery research costs, Ford lent him $1.1 million to continue the research. Their friendship and mutual respect lasted their entire lives.
Unfortunately, the battery story also ends in tragedy.
It does. Edison was aggressively promoting his nickel-iron batteries as being safer than lead-acid batteries for use in submarines. The problem is, nickel-iron batteries leak hydrogen gas.
And lead acid leak chlorine, which is also dangerous.
Right. But in January 1916, during maintenance on the USS E-2, a hydrogen explosion occurred, and it killed 5 men. Edison vehemently blamed operator error, but the event immediately derailed any hope of selling his batteries to the Navy. It was over.
Shifting to his personal life, the sources paint a really complex, often difficult picture of a domestic existence that was structured entirely around the lab.
His first marriage was to Mary Stilwell. She was one of his 16-year-old employees, and he was 24. They had 3 children, Marion, who he called Dot, Thomas Jr. Dash, and William. Edison was often neglectful, just prioritizing the laboratory above everything else.
And Mary died tragically young.
At 29, of unknown causes, possibly a brain tumor, or some sources suggest a morphine overdose. And his son, Thomas Jr., he struggled immensely living under his father's shadow.
It was a public humiliation for the family.
It was. Thomas Jr. got involved in these shady ventures, using his famous last name to market snake oil products. Things like Electrovita and the latest Edison discovery, which claimed to be life-extending tonics.
And the elder Edison had to sue his own son.
To stop him from using the family name for these fraudulent products. It just shows the immense tension between the genius inventor and the chaotic personal life he often left in his wake.
His second marriage was in 1886 to Mina Miller. She was 20, he was 39.
Nikola Tesla, who was often a bitter rival, actually made a surprisingly insightful observation about Mina. He suggested that if Edison hadn't married a woman of exceptional intelligence like her, who made it her mission to preserve him, he would have died years earlier from sheer neglect of his own health and basic needs.
That detail is amazing. The man who systematized the world couldn't even organize his own dinner.
It illustrates the paradox perfectly. He was often neglectful, leaving all the housekeeping and child-rearing entirely to Mina and the staff. Yet when he was present, he was extremely controlling.
Except, of course, for his 4th of July tradition.
Right. The deaf man needed an explosive level of noise to enjoy the holiday. Because of his profound hearing loss, he would make his own fireworks, and he'd add TNT to them to make sure the resulting boom was loud enough for him to feel the concussion.
That physical limitation, again, driving an extreme response.
Always. His sons, from a second marriage, they found legitimate success. Charles, who took over the company in 1926, later served as the governor of New Jersey. And Theodore became a successful independent inventor and physicist.
And finally, the ultimate anecdote that ties his whole life and his love of chemistry together. When he died on October 18, 1931, at age 84.
His last breath was famously captured and preserved in a test tube. His son Charles sent it to the Henry Ford Museum as a symbol of his father's lifelong dedication to chemistry and his profound friendship with Ford.
So we have the industrialist, the inventor, the businessman. What about the man's mind? The sources characterize him as a lifelong free thinker, heavily influenced by Thomas Paine's scientific deism.
He had a very specific, non-traditional concept of the divine. He stated it pretty clearly. I do not believe in the God of the theologians, but that there is a supreme intelligence I do not doubt. He completely rejected the idea of a personal, intervening God from organized religion.
And this led to a lot of controversy. In a 1910 interview, he was widely labeled an atheist after saying, "Nature is what we know. We do not know the gods of religions, and nature is not kind or merciful or loving."
He used a logical argument for it. He said if God made him, he also made the fish he ate, and he asked where the mercy for the fish came in.
But he later clarified that.
He did. He explained that his concept of nature was the supreme intelligence that rules all matter. He was a materialist in his belief structure. He even explored and promoted ideas in panpsychism, which is the theory that consciousness, or mind, is a fundamental and pervasive feature of all things.
That's a deep philosophical framework underpinning all of his relentless experimentation. Politically, he was a lifelong Republican. He supported industrial capitalism and high tariffs to protect domestic manufacturing.
He moves in the highest circles. He met presidents like Rutherford B. Hayes and Benjamin Harrison, and he famously took those camping trips with Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone. They called themselves the Vagabonds, acting as this walking, talking advertisement for American ingenuity.
And his moral compass, it seems to have been dominated by pacifism.
Yes. When he was asked to serve as a naval consultant during World War I, he stipulated that he would only work on defensive weapons. He stated later, "I am proud of the fact that I never invented weapons to kill." He helped the Navy with things like locating submarines, but he refused to develop offensive weaponry.
He was also an early and practical supporter of women's suffrage.
Stating in 1915, every woman in this country is going to have the vote.
Hmm.
And he backed that up practically. He employed women in factory jobs that required nimble fingers, like making brush wires for dynamos, acknowledging their dexterity and their capability in the industrial process.
And finally, he even tried to invent a better financial system.
In 1922, he published a proposed amendment to the Federal Reserve banking system. He was advocating for a commodity-backed currency that would remove control from the traditional banks. It failed to get any legislative support, but it just shows the scale of his systematic mind. He was applying his R&D principles to economics and national policy.
This has been a true deep dive into Thomas Edison, far, far beyond the light bulb filament. We've explored the sheer, just bizarre inventory of Menlo Park, a physical manifestation of his relentless R&D process.
We witnessed the devastating DC limitations that led to that bitter merger that created General Electric, and the massive catastrophic industrial failure of the Ogdensburg mine that somehow laid the groundwork for his quiet, profitable success in the cement business.
And ultimately, the takeaway is the systematic nature of his work. He didn't just invent, he industrialized invention itself.
He showed that systematic, relentless effort, coupled with massive capital investment and an astonishing tolerance for failure, like that battery recall where he paid millions out of his own pocket, that's the recipe for modern innovation. He taught the world how to fail fast, learn from the data, and scale at the next attempt.
So what does all this mean for you, the learner? Edison's story is a profound lesson in the business of creativity and the absolute necessity of systematic failure. His failures, whether it was in mining or in battery technology or even in his family life, they were data points that informed his next, often massive, success.
It shows that true expertise isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about being able to afford, both mentally and financially, to keep going after they inevitably happen.
And here is the provocative final thought we want to leave you with. Despite his profound hearing loss, Edison fought tooth and nail for years to personally approve every single musical record released by his company. He was experiencing that art in a fundamentally different physical way, as vibrations transmitted through his teeth.
Which raises an important question. When we talk about invention and innovation, how much of the final product is defined not by the creator's boundless ability, but by their own unique physical and often frustrating limitations?